Hi, I'm Felice Bogus, class of 1986, Go Purple, and today we're hosting a cooking demo for the Wellesley College Jewish Students Association, and I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks, some of my favorite things to bake and how to do them, a little bit better. Let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I graduated with a double major in political science and sociology and had no idea what I was going to do with it. Ended up going into business for a number of years, and finally at about age 50 decided I was going to just follow my passion. It's a cliche, but I managed to talk my way into a job at a modern French patisserie in Raleigh, North Carolina. I apprenticed for about a year or so and was finally hired on and worked for about 5 years before COVID hit. I haven't been working recently, but it's been some of the best 5 years of my life. I've really been very professionally fulfilled, and I've really enjoyed it quite a bit. So that's me. Let's start making some Rugelach. I'm not really looking to show you so much an exact recipe. When you come right down to it, your mother's recipe, your grandmother's recipe, those are the best ones. And if you like the recipe you have, stay with it. The recipes that you got in your packet, they're good and they're going to work. But let's just look at some tips and tricks. Let me start by showing you how to make the dough. I generally prefer baking by weight. It's a lot more precise. However, this is an older recipe, still written in cups and spoons, and it's more likely that that's still what you're going to be having. Now, when you measure flour, there's different ways of doing it, and you can end up with a cup of flour weighing anywhere from 4 ounces to 5 ounces. And there's a lot of variability in there. So if you're going to be using a cup, probably the best way to do it is what they call the scoop and sweep method. So watch what I'm doing here. I'm just taking the flour, big scoopful of flour, and letting it fall over my cup. I'm going to let that overflow. Then I'm going to take a straight edge, you can use the back of a knife, anything straight, and sweep it across your cup to level. And there's your flour. So let's start making the dough. Equal parts of unsalted butter and cream cheese. Room temperature, please. If they're not at room temperature, you're not going to have a really awful time getting the dairy to blend in together. The best way to get your butter and cream cheese at room temperature is to let it sit out for a few hours. People will tell you don't use the microwave. You can, you just need to be very, very careful. If you've gotten as far as to melt your butter, make garlic bread, because you're really not going to be able to do this recipe with it. So let's get this nice and light and fluffy. We're going to beat that together. It's always a good idea to scrape down your bowl every so often, because you are going to get ingredients flung up on the side of the bowl and they're not going to mix in. If you don't happen to have a stand mixer, that's fine. Our grandmothers didn't necessarily either. You can do this with a handheld electric mixer. You can do it by hand. In that case, you really are going to want your ingredients at room temperature, because otherwise you're going to be beating until your arms fall off. You can also do the dough in a food processor. I have not tried it myself that way. If you do that, do not let your dairy come up to room temperature. You want to use your dairy cold if you're going in a food processor, because the food processor creates a lot of heat, and that in and of itself is going to help melt your dairy. So we've got the butter and the cream cheese nicely blended together. We're going to add in the flour that we measured. And a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Pay attention when a recipe calls for salt, whether it calls for kosher salt or table salt. It makes a difference. They weigh out differently. 5 grams of salt is 5 grams of salt, whatever you're using. A 1/4 teaspoon of salt, though, will be different whether you're using table salt or kosher salt. It'll also be different whether you're using diamond crystal salt or Morton salt. So use what the recipe tells you to use. So the dough is starting to come together now, and that's pretty much beaten enough. Now you'll notice when we started doing this, I started the mixer on a lower speed and moved it up. Reason being, I don't really want to be cleaning flour off of my ceiling. I've done that with pesto already. I do not need to do it with flour. All right, so once you've got your dough mixed together, and it doesn't have to come together in a ball. We're not making bread dough here. We're going to divide it into 4 and we're going to refrigerate it. Now, I prefer to use a scale because I'm just challenged measurement wise. So what I'm going to do is weigh the entire ball of dough, divide that by 4. I like to form the dough into a disc before I put it in the refrigerator. You'll see it makes it so much more easy to roll out later rather than trying to fight with it. And if you've wrapped it in plastic, you can smush it down better and form it better. So I've got my dough made, I've got it wrapped. We want to put it in the refrigerator and we're going to leave it at least 2 hours, preferably overnight. All right. Let's get started on the fillings. We're going to start with the classic one that everyone probably grew up on, the raisin, cinnamon, walnut one. Now, if you looked at the directions, you'll notice I said that you should pre-soak the raisins ahead of time in hot water. These have been soaked, they've been dried. The reason for doing that is, even if you've just opened a brand new container of raisins, a lot of times you're going to find they're a little bit past their prime, especially if they've been sitting in your house for a while, they're a little bit hard. Soaking them in hot water, draining them, and then letting them dry gives you a much moister end product, a lot more pleasant to bite into. And I also find from my experience that it just makes life a little easier if you give them a quick rough chop. So simple. If you're not familiar with using large blades, watch the grip on my knife. Thumb here, finger here. Don't run your finger along the spine of the knife. That's a good way to let it slip and to have problems. Also, always keep your fingers tucked in. Not looking for any kind of precision here, not looking for nice sizes, just a good rough chop so that when you bite into the rugelach, you're not pulling out chunks of raisins. Okay, that's good enough. You can absolutely use your knife for scraping things off your board. Never use the blade. Use the back of your knife. That way you don't dull the blade. Keeps it in good shape for next time. Okay, same thing with the walnuts. You don't really want to be biting into a large chunk of nuts. So let's give those a quick rough chop also. Now to the raisins and the walnuts, we're going to add a cup of plain white sugar. And you don't have to be quite as precise here as you did with the flour, but still don't go crazy with that. And then 4 teaspoons of cinnamon. Sounds like a lot, but it does not seem like it once you've got it finished. And this is coming from someone who doesn't actually like cinnamon a whole lot. And we'll just give that a quick mix together. And we are good to go. All right, let's look at another filling, a little less traditional. This is sort of Turkish. We're using Turkish apricots and pistachios. Gives it a little more of a Middle Eastern flavor. One of the things you might see here on the apricots, they look a lot darker than what you might be used to. You might be expecting something more bright orange. These are unsulfured. They're not treated with sulfur. The sulfur would help them retain the orange color. Honestly, I don't have a big preference either way, and you should get what you like. I got these because that's what the store had the day I went shopping. It doesn't really affect the taste one way or another, just the looks. So this is pretty similar to the last filling, and what we're going to do is chop the pistachios. And I know the recipe you have says that they should be unroasted, raw. I don't know, most of the time when you're using nuts, it's a matter of taste, but most of the time having them toasted brings out another depth of flavor to them. This is another case where I think you should really go with what your preference is and what the store you're shopping at has. Don't go crazy if you can only find one way and not the other. However, I would not suggest using salted here. That could alter things in a way you really didn't intend. And then you'll notice the way the recipe is written, it does not say 1/4 cup apricots chopped. It says 1/4 cup chopped apricots. The difference there is, if it was 1/4 cup apricots chopped, you'd measure 1/4 cup like this, chop them, and what you got would be what you got. When it says 1/4 cup finely chopped apricots, we're going to chop them first, then measure them. A little more precision. Make sure to keep your fingers out of the way of the blade. All right, we've got the fruit and the nuts together. We're going to add some sugar. And this one gets seasoned with cardamom. If you do any Swedish baking, you might recognize it from there, but it gives a little bit of a lemony flavor. It's a little hard to describe, but it's different, and you'll recognize it as Middle Eastern when you do the baking. All right, so through the magic of video, it's tomorrow, and I have refrigerated rested dough. And you're primarily resting your dough to let the high percentage of fat in it solidify again so you don't have a big mess. Let me give you another tip here. If you live in the South, if you live in Israel, you live somewhere where it's hot, if you're trying this during the summer, make sure you have good air conditioning. If you're able to refrigerate your surface, what you can do is you can take a metal tray filled with ice and let it rest on your granite or marble counter first if you need to cool it down some. If you're lucky enough to have stainless steel, you can do the same. But don't try to do this in the heat of summer, otherwise you're going to have a really big mess. So let's start rolling this dough out. I might have let it rest a little bit too long, I'm not really sure. I think I did. But you notice I'm also picking it up periodically to just make sure it's not sticking to the board. We're looking for a circle, about 11 inches or so. It doesn't need to be an exact circle. And you really do want to try to keep your thickness about as even as you can. You notice the rolling pin I'm using is a little different. It's not quite standard. It's thicker in the middle and tapered at the ends. The French call this a pie pin. The idea is if you roll over the edge of your dough, you're not flattening it in so much. This actually is my grandmother's rolling pin. I don't know if she brought it over from Europe with her or not, but she came over from Białystok, Poland in about 1906. So the way I check to see, because again I'm measurement impaired, if we have the dough large enough, is my biggest trick for Rugelach. This is a pie divider. You can get them online at Amazon. You can get them at restaurant supply stores. You'll notice there's a number on top there. The side says 12, and then the other side says 16. That tells you how many pieces it divides it into. You can use either one. I tend to use 12 when I'm making them for other people, 16 when I make them at home so we eat less. But I generally try to go for the diameter of the pie divider, and you can see I'm not there yet. So I'm going to just roll that out a little more. One of the tricks I found sometimes is to, when I get these odd-shaped edges, is to just hold the center and rotate the dough around. Rotate the pin around, sorry. And you'll definitely see me do that again with other pieces of dough. Close enough now. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with the classic filling. You want to use about a good 1/3 to 1/2 of a cup. I'll generally spoon a generous 1/3 of a cup into a measuring cup. And what I try to do is I don't spread it all over the whole dough. I spread it in a ring, about 1/2 inch to 1 inch from the outer edge. And I will go over, because you never get good distribution like that. And just make sure that there's some nuts and some raisins everywhere. And then I will take the pin and very lightly roll over the filling to press it in lightly. Don't want to go hard here. We're not looking to mash it in, just want to get it to stick some. Take the pie divider on whichever side you've chosen to use, center it, and press down. This will not cut your dough for you. What it will do, though, is give you very clear, very even lines to follow. You can go take a chef's knife now. I like using the pizza wheel, and just cut along those lines that you just made. And then we're going to start rolling them up. I find a lot of times it can get a little hard to get them started, so I use a bench scraper just to pick up the edge. You can use any tool you have that works for you, and like always, the first one is never the neatest. But here we go. Now, take a break and let's look at something else. I'm lining with parchment paper. This makes all the difference in the world when you're using a filling that's going to be essentially melted molten sugar. You do not want to clean that off your tray. Nobody wants to do that. Not even dishwashers in restaurants, nobody wants to do that. So there's 2 ways you can do this. If you don't think you're going to be using a lot of parchment paper, it's something you're just going to do occasionally, the grocery stores sell it on a roll. It's just like a roll of plastic wrap, wax paper. Just tear off as much as you need and use it. If you do think you're going to be using a lot, or if you've got some good friends who are willing to share with you, you can buy parchment paper by the case, also from restaurant supply stores. This paper that I'm using is in full sheet size, meaning the actual sheet is double the size of this, and I just cut it down. And it also works very well if you want to line cake pans or anything else. If you happen to have a sill pad at home, that's the silicone baking mats, that's also a good choice for this. They'll clean up very, very easily. But absolutely my choice for just about everything. So we're going to take the Rugelach and place them point side down on the lined baking sheet. Now you can put these close together when you place them. They don't spread. There's really nothing in here that is going to cause them to rise. Now you also notice what I did by making sure there wasn't filling in the center was when it pushes down a little, but what's happening is I'm not getting filling running out on all sides. You'll still be getting a full bite of filling when you eat it, but when you roll the triangle, it's not a problem. Another thing I'll also mention, you can see, is I have a towel under my board. That's because this board isn't exactly flat. It's been washed so many times it has warped a fair amount. And if I try to roll on it without anchoring it, it's going to be rolling into the camera. So having a dish towel, or you can always dampen some paper towels and do that, and put that under your board. That keeps your board steady when you're cutting, when you're doing other things, so that it doesn't slide on you. So I hear you asking, because I've got excellent hearing, what happens to that filling you've got sitting on the board? You still have 3 more pieces of dough to roll. Easy. We are just going to take the bench scraper, or any other tool you've been using, and put it right back into our filling. Because we're using it on the same item, there's no reason whatsoever not to reuse it. Got another piece of dough here. This one I didn't let rest outside as long as I did the others. If I try to roll this, this is going nowhere. If I try too hard, the dough's gonna crack. If I overhandle the dough, the heat from my hands is gonna warm it up too much, and then I'm just gonna have it smearing. You might have noticed the last batch of dough was just about borderline on whether it was too soft to roll or not. So this is a technique made for the times right now. Take your rolling pin and pound the crud out of it. You might want to warn people in the house that you're about to do this. People get scared sometimes. Okay, a lot softer now. You can actually see some movement in it. And we can just go and roll it exactly the same way. I might have overdone it a little again. Same way we did the last one. Now another trick you can use, and this works for pie dough too, if you're trying to really keep the circle, when you lift it up and move it, don't turn it 90 degrees. Turn it a quarter turn each time. But what you're going to see me do again is what I mentioned the last time. To try to get that circle back, hold one end and just rotate out. Now for the Turkish Rugelach, that goes on a base of jam. We want to melt that gently over a low heat until it's spreadable. So we're going to take the melted preserves and brush lightly over the dough. Now because I use preserves, by definition that means there are pieces of fruit in here. If that bothers you, go right ahead and strain it out. I'm not sure why it would bother you, because you're putting more fruit in there anyhow. And we're just doing a thin layer. We do not want molten sugar oozing out when we bake this. Silicone brush cleans up super easy. I always used to use paintbrushes, 1-inch paintbrushes from the home store. Stop doing that because they can be a little difficult to clean up, and you occasionally get bristles stuck in your dessert. So, big fan of the silicone brushes. Same idea as the previous. I'm just going to put a ring of filling around the outside, giving ourselves some room to move things in. Looking for more or less even distribution. A little more, a little less, it's all right. And the same process. Press down. And cut your dough. So you can probably see I've got a little tear in the dough here. This is one of the most forgiving doughs you're ever going to work with. Just pinch it back together with your fingers, roll it on the inside, and nobody but you will ever know that happened. You'll remember I mentioned earlier about the dough not having any sugar in it, and there's an advantage there. This is where it comes in. We can do savory rugelach, and that's something you might not have thought of. It's something I'm playing around with, and I don't really have a recipe for this. I'm winging it, I'm using things I have in the house, but this is also something you can do. Recipes are suggestions. Yes, they're formulas, but once you know how to do something, you need to make it your own. And if that involves using figs, blue cheese, and walnuts like I'm going to try, so be it. Some other ideas you could do for savory, you could put down pesto and some cheese. You could do feta, brush with a little olive oil, put down some feta, chopped olives, and sprinkle your top with za'atar. If you're southern, you could put cheddar cheese and pimentos in there, and we've got pimento cheese rugelach. No reason why not. It's yours. Make it the way you want to. The reason I didn't melt these preserves was because you can see this is a lot more liquid than the other one was. So I'm just going to try to be a lot more careful. The tool I'm using is an offset spatula. It is probably my single favorite kitchen tool of all time. And yes, I have taken garbage from my chef for saying that. I'm sure it was meant in a very loving way. He is a wonderful man, whom I had to define mensch for once because he accused me of cursing him out in Yiddish when I called him a mensch. But you can do almost anything with an offset spatula. Very easy to spread. It's great for prying cakes out of pans when they don't want to come out. Really good for measuring small amounts of things like baking powder and baking soda to put them on your scale, so you don't have to get those things dirty. So same idea here, just brushing very lightly with the jam. Crumbled blue cheese. You can use whatever blue cheese that you might have around, and if you're one of those people who simply can't stand blue cheese, I'm not going to cook for you, but notwithstanding, use what you like. A nice aged provolone could actually work pretty well with this too. Probably be very nice. And get some walnuts in. Pecans would be wonderful too. I happen to have extra walnuts from when I made the first batch of Rugelach, but yeah, pecans would be great. Give it a little more of a southern twist. We have all our Rugelach rolled. We're ready to go in the oven. One thing missing, we need to glaze them. So, simple egg. We're just going to separate the egg. We are just going to be using the egg yolk today. You can save the egg whites. You can make meringues. You can make a breakfast omelet. So just going to beat that up a little. And same clean silicone brush this time. We're just going to brush with the egg yolk, and that helps us give a really nice golden brown color to it. And the next thing we're going to do after we have them all coated in the egg yolk is we're going to sprinkle these sweet ones with granulated sugar. I prefer granulated. You can use large crystal decorating sugar if you like. You can use demerara sugar, which is more or less the same as turbinado if you like the brown color, if you like the large crystals. My personal preference is for the granulated, largely because that's how my mother did it and that's just what I expect. On the savory ones, we're going to glaze them, but we're going to obviously not sprinkle with sugar. For this particular one, I'm going to leave them unsprinkled, but for other savory choices, if you were doing something Italian, you could sprinkle with grated Parmesan or Romano. You could sprinkle with a spice that matches your filling. You're not going to be in the oven all that long, so it really, you don't have to worry too much about your herbs burning. And before the egg has a chance to set here, I'm going to just go and sprinkle very generously with sugar. All right, we're ready to go into the oven with the Rugelach, and we're going to go in about 15 minutes. We're going to bake for about 15 minutes. You want to go by the color more so than the time, because home ovens are notoriously off by about 25 degrees or so. Start checking at about 13, and about halfway through you want to flip your trays. What that means is you want to rotate them front to back, and you want to exchange from top to bottom, because even on a convection oven, on a home convection oven, your airflow is not going to be 100% even. So that's going to guarantee the most even bake you can get. Okay, so it's time to check and see if the Rugelach look done. They pretty well do. This was 17 minutes actually, because that's what my oven takes. You have to go about based on what your oven wants to do. So we're going to let these cool on the rack for a while, because if you don't, you are going to burn the heck out of your fingers and the Rugelach will fall apart on you. So we'll come back in a while after they've had a chance to cool. Like the Rugelach have sat on the tray just long enough for the tray to be cool enough to handle. We don't want to let them cool completely on the tray because moisture is going to form underneath and the bottoms are going to get soggy. And if you're a fan of the Great British Baking Show, you know the last thing you want is a soggy bottom. So as soon as it's cool enough for you to handle without burning yourself, you want to start taking the Rugelach off the tray and putting them on a rack. The Rugelach are now completely cool, room temperature, and they're going to disappear very quickly. But on the off chance they don't and you do have leftovers, you can keep them, the ones with the jam will keep a little less time, but the ones without the jam, they can probably keep about a week in a cookie tin or another airtight container. And if you have any questions about anything we've done, I'm going to be right back live to try to answer them for you. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to enjoy one of the Rugelach because they're that good.